This is Potatoes Gang, and today, really important subject. Nigeria finally signed onto the African Continental Free Trade Area. Now, this is supposed to broaden the opportunity for engaging in global trade with Africa and intra-African trade being the base. At a time when poverty really continues to be the scourge and there is a need to create opportunities for economic growth, employment, and all of that, clearly increased trade with neighbors is fundamental to that kind of progress. But it took us a while to get to sign on. Today on Potatoes Gang, we'll look up to the gang to throw some light on a number of perspectives on this. First of all, benefits of trade. Two, essentially why Nigeria took so long to sign on. Three, how can Nigeria optimally benefit from open, free economic intercourse across the continent of Africa? Because we're notorious for signing agreements and then sitting back and doing nothing about it. Well, I guess we have more than enough people to throw light on this matter. What are the benefits of international trade, really? Muda, you are, technically speaking, the trade economist of practice, from praxis, with your work at the chamber and all of that. What are the benefits of trade? Because I found, for example, in Niamey, that when we engaged on that subject, I was on a panel, and by the time we finished the panel, somebody in Nigeria came to me and said, you know, we never really understood these things. Let's engage.
Well, trade is very important. Unfortunately, we have a wrong perception of trade in this environment. We don't really appreciate the value. First, you need trade to connect those who are producing to those who are consuming. You can't be a manufacturer and also be a retailer, or the middleman that you move something from either from your factory to the market, across the country and all of that.
In fact, trade facilitates specialization to start with.
It facilitates higher efficiency and all of that. Secondly, it promotes competition. You see, when people talk about poverty reduction, sometimes we don't understand the fundamental issues that can really deal with the issue of poverty. And because of competition protects the consumer from exploitation. It also protects the system from people who make supernormal profits. It helps them to bring down wars, things that are monopolistic in nature. And in the process of competition, the average consumer benefits much more. Take the example of the telecoms situation. You are coming from the Nitel story, then to the first time when we had the first GSM company, when we were told that it was not possible to have a per second billing, when we were buying SIM card for almost 50,000 naira. Between then and now, costs have gone up. But the prices are dropping. Have tumbled. So how better can you even serve the common people, if not to create an environment that allows for competition?
And I think it's also important to make the point about, I don't want to use the technical term on what this whole business of comparative advantage, because it's become an issue. The economists who are poo-pooing Ricardo and the very original ideas of comparative advantage, but let's leave all of that. But the fact that you can produce something that you produce better than some other person and exchange with that person will ensure that the consumers will get the best and the price will be lower for them. And that's a very critical part of trade that we particularly need to get people to come to terms with. And we can better do that when we have capacities for aggregating output. You see, we have many small producers fractured around the place. If a small producer comes up with only so much, he doesn't have power in engaging with the person he is selling with. But if we can aggregate, let's take my favorite example, Nestle makes a fortune from producing chocolates. People who are supplying these inputs are Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. Everything they produce put together is a small fraction of the profit of Nestle, who is just buying from them, processing and shipping. And even the way the market is, who are those making chocolates in Africa? Majorly South Africans, Egypt. They get this paste that has left Ghana, and they get, as raw cocoa, and gone to Switzerland, and then they manufacture and sell. You look at the kind of cost to the African who is buying chocolate. But if you could aggregate Ghana production with that of Cote d'Ivoire and have a major factory there that adds value and then ships chocolates, the people of Ghana, the people of Cote d'Ivoire will be much wealthier people. And the terms of trade that tends to be weighed against suppliers of raw material in international trade will not be to their disadvantage. This is why I think it's important that we see the benefit of greater markets. You take the Cameroon, Nigeria axis and what that area, possibilities of aggregation. And the number of entrepreneurs that we create from this aggregation, young people who can then ensure that this happens, job creation and all of that. So why have we, knowing that all of these things are beneficial, why have we taken so long?
I think the takeoff point, just like Muda alluded, a wrong understanding of what trade or international trade really represents. You can trace it back to the colonial history. The big producers were mostly multinationals from the colonial administrators. And when they were ceding power to indigenous people, the private sector also had to separate, localizing human resources in the manufacturing platform. But the big players in Europe still held on to the trade machinery. So the perception of the indigenous people is that trade at that time, international trade was more like a colonial hangover around the necks of producers in developing countries. And because of that negative orientation, there was no total embrace at our side. Unfortunately for us, because of the late entry of many developing countries in this market, we fail to appreciate that trade is like a lubricant. You produce here, and you could sell at the extreme end of the world, as far as Japan or Australia. What you have done indirectly is expanding the scope of your market. So you are no longer limited by a very low population. For example, like Denmark. Denmark, 2003 had a population of 5 million people. Any manufacturing enterprise to open business in Denmark must have first gone out to test the market. Are there export possibilities? If there is no export possibilities, you don't get state support. So manufacturing in Denmark took off on an export-oriented program, implying that almost 60-70% of that domestic production end up in the international market. So you are not limited by your small population.
That clearly says that we need a strategy. So just signing an agreement is not enough. What is Nigeria's strategy? What has been our challenge with strategy for engaging and getting the most out of these agreements that we signed?
Nigeria has signed more than 600 agreements, right from ECOWAS to AGOA to WTO and all that. Now the economy is still very weak and foreign reserve is still less than 50 billion compared with other countries who are still in the OPEC and other sectors. So all the trade policies we have seen, none is signed. None is documented. Even when we have signed this agreement, if we have issues, there is nothing to hold on to. If you look at Section 12 of the Nigerian Constitution, every agreement entered into must be approved and domesticated by the national agreement. The last one is economic diplomacy. As we have been
celebrated economic diplomacy this time.
In 1960, the thing has not changed. If we look at it today, import is on a single window. The way I'm talking to you, I'm talking to the world, is the way export is done. I can, right from the comfort of my home, open an LC. But exportation is not like that. We're in a country of about 200 million. We only have export program, no export. We only have export policy, no export program, which is, we now feel the NSP. This is the time to work. We don't go back. We don't want to go back to say Nigeria does not have the capacity to do ABCD. As long as you have a professor, you don't have problem. What the government need to do now is to identify the best level to implement. There was a time we're looking at the committee. The committee have done their job. They've done a good job. What strategy do we have? Who are the drivers? Do we have a team? These are the things now we need to do.
My worry is that we often focus on government. Bureaucrats go out, sign this agreement. You know, for them it's just another bureaucratic effort, ESTA code, whatever. The private sector doesn't come along enough to own this thing because they're the ones who will create the profits that will come from it. I mean, take a very simple thing. Trade between SMEs on the continent. There are many areas that we could do so much more if small players across the borders could engage and exchange more smoothly. But because these things are the bureaucrats and not a private sector person going in, will see the opportunities, will take advantage of it, harvest more. How do we bring along the private sector more so that we don't have the kind of problems we had with getting agreement on whether this was in Nigeria's interest?
Now, you see, my perspective on this is that if you don't get the policy environment right, it's very difficult to position the private sector to also play the role. You see, at the center of all of this has to be a strategy to drive competitiveness.
Yeah.
Because all along, the focus on industrialization has always been on protecting the domestic industry.
The ISI strategy.
There is too much emphasis on protectionism.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this strategy has not worked. First, the borders are very porous. Secondly, all the state officials at the borders, a lot of compromise and things like that. So there is not even effective protection. So the emphasis of strategy has to be on competitiveness.
Yes. Now,
and we have to
you're absolutely right.
look at the issues of our domestic policy in the area of foreign exchange policy is very key. Interest rate policy is very key. You mentioned the issues of trade policy is very important. Issues of investment policy. There are so many domestic policy issues that we need to get right. And again, investment in infrastructure. What strategy do we have to mobilize capital for infrastructure development? These things are very key.
We'll take a break, listen to some people out there, and we'll come back and really take this on because this is at the heart of whether or not we make a success of Acfta.
When the government is seen that way, it will be reduced. We don't want people that are just striving to get there.
And one advantage of this African Free Trade Agreement for Nigeria is the ease at which Nigeria would conduct trade with its neighboring African countries. But the disadvantage we can, see from this trade for Nigeria would be the further reduction of our domestic production. So as it stands now, we are doing very little as regards production domestically, and then signing on to this kind of free trade agreement would further reduce it because one, we're battling with poor infrastructure, we're battling with electricity and and whatnot.
Education is the premise of progress in every society. Over the years, we've seen our educational system weaken from what it was to what we see now.
We are faced with a situation where our institutions release graduates with little or no employability skills.
I'll advocate that employability and vocational training centers should be established in institutions. This will expose students to the realities of the corporate world and the business world.
A possible solution would be for Nigerian education to be tailored to the evolving needs of the world.
This year, the UN International Youth Day is focused on transforming education. The Center for Values in Leadership, CVL, would like to invite you for our International Youth Day Conference, scheduled for Thursday, August 15th, 2019 at 10 a.m. We look forward to seeing you there.
And we are back. This is Potatoes Gang. We've heard from out there. But before we went away, Mude was making a very important point about the tie-up between policy and performance. One of the great experiences of my growing up, if you want to call it, was spending a little time in 1997 at MITI. MITI is Japan's mythical Ministry of International Trade and Industry. And one of the things I often say about that experience is that when you go to MITI, you can't tell where the private sector stops and the public sector begins, because they are hands in glove. And that is where the whole concept of Japan Incorporated came out of. Now, there are many critical things that have to be done with cooperation between policy leaders, champions in the public sector, and private sector leaders to make trade work for Nigeria. What are the major hindrances to have been able to achieve this effectively? What are the things that have been in the way of this kind of collaboration? I know there are issues of corruption that have come with many policies. How do we structure incentives? How do we ensure that these things work?
Beyond the thinking about incentives, the instability in government itself. A couple of years back, I did a study on ministerial appointment, 1959 to 2009. On the average, the tenure of a Minister of Trade and Industry or Minister of Commerce and Industry was about 1 year, 1 month. We had instances where the minister spent about 4 ministers spent less than 6 months. It was very interesting to see the handing over note of some of these ministers, because they rarely settle to work before the minister is changed. So that ordinarily brings a disconnect between the public sector and the private sector, because you never know where you are heading.
Just a little joke about that, you know, I want to break your thought. I once went to see a Minister of Industries, our dear friend Evers Marshall, and then we were talking. I said to him, you know, the problem is over your head. He said, where? Over. He said, he looked at. I said, look over your head. The photographs of the former ministers of industry. There were so many. It was exactly, we calculated, he and I started counting. It was an average of 1 a year.
1 a year. Yeah. And in some instances, about 4 ministers spend less than 6 months in office. So in terms of vision, in terms of execution of projects, it's totally alien to our culture. Government has to rework itself to allow stability. It's through stability that growth can really come. And when the minister goes away, the new minister brings new ideas. So just like we have a lot of abandoned projects, there are quite a lot of abandoned policies as well. So this is a incentive to private sector to really kill. Government most often mouths that we want a private sector-led economy. But the key to the vehicle is in the hand of the public sector. So the private sector sits on the driver's seat without the key, so we cannot really move forward. So government has to rework itself to ensure that there's stability in policy, there's continuity in policy. This is what can encourage investors to really...
Now, a lot of the argument about Acfta is about Nigerian manufacturing, how Nigeria can become a dumping ground and this and that. But we need an industrialization strategy that can give us competitiveness on global value chains. What's preventing us? What kind of strategy? I give an example. My preference I've expressed for years. And I remember when I first expressed this in my VW days, I think the only person who really understood what I was talking about at that time was Victor Odozi, who was Deputy Governor of the Central Bank. When I said, look, this our strategy is not going to work. Let's look for components in the motor vehicle that we can become globally dominant on that value chain. My favorite was, of course, rubber, and where Nigeria had #1 yield per hectare in the world at the time on rubber. So become the manufacturers of 2, 3, 4 rubber components for supply into the global value chains of auto companies. You will create more jobs, create more. That idea, of course, was not bought into, and people wanted the prestige of want to see a Nigerian car, which didn't work, because today that has been repackaged, if you will, in structural economics thinking by people like Justin Lin, when he talks about latent comparative advantage, where you can have industrial policy around an area in which you can become globally competitive. And instead of the general idea of the import substitution logic of protecting industrial areas and then ending up with permanent infant industries, how should we argue for an industrial development strategy that will make Nigeria compete and take advantage of this free trade area to build the economy?
Just a week ago, Mr. President came up and said he's going to create 10 million jobs per year, about 100 million jobs in 10 years. Instead of people to sit down and look at it holistically, they said, will it be there for the next 10 years? Some of us are still talking, and most of the organizations we are representing today, we have left them for 4 or 5 years. When my friend Muda came here and said, we are leaving the whole thing, that continental free trade must succeed, it's now on your shoulder. He said, no, that we cannot run away, and we will not run away. Nigeria is #1 producer of yam in the world. And if we develop the yam value chain, we will create 500,000 jobs. We have suddenly found ourselves in a situation.
Cassava, same thing.
Cassava, we are #1 in the world. Melon, we are #1 in the world. Shea butter, we are not #1. But if you take cocoa, for instance, West Africa produces 80% of the total cocoa requirement. Production. That is at the elementary level, which we have not even been able to develop the value chain. The whole of last month, I was moving around the southwest, southeast, south-south. I went to Naifo. When I saw the plantation, I was crying, because it was from there, it was taken to Malaysia. I went to the plantation in Malaysia. I know how I was welcomed. And last year, Malaysia made over 35 billion for the sale of palm produce. Nigeria price is 200% above the world market price. And today, we are importing tallow to produce soap. Otherwise, most of our industries could have been done.
From Malaysia, actually.
We are importing. No, that is part of the reason why some of us said that even the continental free trade, the rule of origin must be followed. Because as we are here, some of us have walked around West Africa. We know what is happening in our neighboring countries. He came up with the issue that says porous border. There's no border that is porous. It's just because we don't have a policy that drives import and export. The organized private sector has put at the back seat that government have taken over business that does not belong to them. It's supposed to be on the PPP arrangement. Policies guide us. What is the role of ambassador? Go and look at the Vienna Austria Convention of 1963. Now we have signed the Continental Free Trade. We target and what assignment have been given to Minister of Trade and Investment, what assignment have been given to trade, because ambassadors are officially put there to act as marketing manager of made in Nigerian goods.
Absolutely. I mean, the South Koreans and co have particularly done a remarkable job of this.
And in all of this, what do you say about oil and gas sector?
You are still importing petrol.
We are an oil-producing country. We have 4 refineries.
From 65.
And we are spending a fortune
to import
petrol. I mean, it's one of the most scandalous things as far as our economic management is concerned. And these are areas in which it's not too much if we serve the whole of the continent with refined petroleum products, with fertilizer, with all these things that are gas-based industries, petrochemical firms.
And you could work with Angola and create special zone of development between Nigeria and Angola that can take all the crude possibilities and that value chain transform the continent. We don't need to go looking for power. Just Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, can generate enough hydropower to power the entire continent. So this kind of division of labor is what makes Acfta the possibility of a huge driver for growth and development on the continent. Unfortunately, time is out and we have to go. But the bottom line truth is that in Acfta, Nigeria has an opportunity to truly grow rich. So all stakeholders need to commit themselves to making sure it works, not for the fun of a piece of paper, but for the commonwealth good of the people of Nigeria. We'll see you next week.